This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues and ideas that shape our lives, with your guide, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Good morning, Matt. Good morning, Connell.
Welcome back, Stu.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I didn't have to fix too much gear while I was away, and the episode sounded great, I thought.
It was great. Do you think, Connell, it was maybe better with that, Stu?
Yeah, I think it probably was, actually. Yeah.
I wasn't going to bring that up. That's what I heard, though.
I could do it a few mornings back in my life. You guys can take it. No. Good to be back. Great to be back with you guys. And, man, that was a great episode. The last episode you guys did, I really got a lot out of that, and I thought there was some really, really powerful points in that. And Matt, we're going to you guys made some promises or some directional indications of where we might go next with that. And I think today'd be good to kind of continue that conversation in relation to Christian spirituality. And I think today we're going to sort of angle a little around the cost of authentic spirituality.
Yeah, so we can get very caught up, even before we embark on this journey, we can get tangled up in misconceptions and false expectations about what is actually involved. And one of the points that we made, Connell, in the last episode was that we can get caught up in this sort of mechanistic understanding of ourselves. We just want to get fixed. And why doesn't just God fix us, and then everything will just go really well, right? We can just relate to God. But one of the things we pointed out is that there's something very problematic about that mechanistic notion of who we are. And we talked about us being relationally defined. So what that means is at core, all of our problems as human beings are relational issues. They can come down to relational issues, primarily our relationship with God, which means that the process of getting fixed isn't just like fixing a machine and it's actually building a relationship. And that's why it's a long incremental process, because it goes at the speed of our willingness to engage in that. And specifically, one of the things that we pointed out, specifically our willingness to let go of what is false. We pointed out that essentially a big part of what God is doing is stripping back the false us, because he wants to relate to who we truly are, right? So big part of what God does is that he strips away this false self so that the real us can emerge in that relationship with God. And so that really reframes, that's going to help for a start, because it's going to help navigate in circumstances where you're wondering, why is God doing this? And there may be circumstances that are just bad. Again, circumstances that even God deplores. And there are plenty of circumstances in life that are like that. But that nevertheless, he uses to and allows actually to be a part of stripping back. And we use the illustration of the diamond.
The diamond was a great metaphor that you used last time, talking about the fact that the raw diamond's actually there, but it's just coated in all this stuff that has to be chipped away, and that takes time. I thought that was a great metaphor you guys used in the last episode.
So I think that sets up, and I said that we talk about some practices, and we will, but there's just a real core concept that I think we need to talk about. We need to talk about first, that I think is at the core of what application of these ideas look like. And, I referred to Psalm 51, those wonderful verses, burnt offerings and sacrifice were not your delight, or else I would bring it. But the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a contrite heart. So in other words, the offering that God wants us to bring is all that is false. It's not actually righteousness. Jesus brought righteousness for us. He wants us actually to bring what is false, to sacrifice on the altar, in a sense, what is false. So we bring essentially our sin and our falsehood, and we bring that, and we place it on the altar, and we give that over to God, because we tend to hold on to that. And so that sort of sets up, I think, that sets the agenda for what is core, I think, to the Christian life or to discipleship, which is this notion of sacrifice. I mean, Jesus says in Matthew 16, he says, if anyone would be my disciple, he should take up his cross. Now, Jesus is anticipating the sacrifice that he, as the incarnate God, present with us would make for us to redeem us and reconcile us to himself.
And that's a key phrase, just let him deny himself.
That's right. Let him deny himself and take up his cross. Now, he's not saying suppress who you really are. That the self that's being denied there is essentially it's the false autonomous self that needs to be sacrificed on the altar. So essentially what Jesus is pointing to, that, I mean, that's a big statement. If you want to be my disciple, this is the core, right? Same thing in Romans 12:1.
Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship.
Yeah, so again there you've got the idea of self-sacrifice and cost as the absolute centerpiece of the Christian life. Nothing is going to be gained apart from it. So the extent to which you're willing to sacrifice in that very core sense, I mean, there are lots of little sacrifices we can make. I can give some money, or I can incur a bit of inconvenience.
Yep.
There are lots of small sacrifices, and we absolutely should be willing to recognize those are part of the Christian life. There's a very core sacrifice, a sacrifice of denying an essentially false or a false self that is obedient to misguided impulses that needs to be denied, that actually is at the core of the Christian life. And so the emergence out of something false and the movement forward is going to be largely a journey of sacrifice. Now, I keep saying that because in our culture of entitlement, in our consumer culture, this fundamental principle of the Christian life needs to be recognized again. We keep, I think, trying to cater to what people want, when actually the core aspect of the nature of the Christian life in relating to God is this notion of sacrifice. It's offering our bodies as living sacrifices. There is no relationship with God without that continual willingness to sacrifice. That's big.
The other thing I'd like to probably just add into that as well is, I think when we look at what the cost that is involved in our relationship with God, I mean, God paid a cost in order to reunite us to him and do with the problem of sin and justice and bring us into grace. And, God paid a price for that. And there's a sense, I think, that we tend to view it as like a transactional, Jesus paid the price. The price has been paid.
So I don't have to?
Yeah, I think there's a sense of that, and as if that has now been won.
Which there's an element of truth to that. But again, falsehood is always a twisted truth.
Yes. What I mean to say is that there's a sense the price has been paid, so now we just got to step into that and enjoy whatever God wants us to do, and we can go about our lives knowing that Jesus has paid the price. But that transactional view, there is a sense of that. But I think when we're talking about relationship, restoration of relationship, it's not just a transaction. In any relationship, you don't just buy the relationship. There's not just a transaction and then it's done. It's the whole purpose of that cost that God paid was to bring us into some kind of continuous development of that relationship. It was to do something. It was to bring us back into relationship, so that it's actually a starting point for something else that we've now got to step into. And it's there to sort of realize that relationship, is to build that relationship. There's a consequence of actions or things that have got to happen that particular sacrifice that God made for us kicks off.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to set all of that aside. Like when we become Christians and we kind of get used to it and familiar with it and get into the routine of it, we kind of lose some sense of
that it's done at that point. That it's done at that point. There's nothing more to do.
Yeah.
But in fact,
but see, here's the thing. Again,
there isn't anything more to do.
Yeah, right. but this is where the misunderstanding is. And you're absolutely right, Connell, because we get stuck in this transactional thing. So Jesus did all this stuff, so we get good stuff, right?
Yes.
Now we get blessing, right? No, hang on. Let's just go back to the basics. God came to us in Christ, suffered and died on a cross, so we could be reconciled with him in relationship with him.
Yes.
And in relationship with him, we become who we were always made to be, children of God, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about what we get.
Yeah.
It's about becoming who we were meant to be.
Yes.
So let's map this.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to a much earlier episode, we mapped, in a sense, our understanding of ourselves in more dimensions than just psychological, physical creatures. And we referred to this a little bit in the last episode. We're not just psychological, physical machines, right? We're relational creatures. We're ultimately children of God. There's this enormous value to human life that comes from us being children of God. And we've mapped this before on that there's not, therefore we map our lives not just on a horizontal axis of pain to pleasure, but because of who we are, there's also this other axis, a vertical axis, where at the top you've got sacredness, right? Which is same idea as holiness. And then at the bottom of that is the experience of the desecration of something sacred. This double axis helps to explain why, for example, certain forms of physical abuse have a deep sense of violation. It's not just about the physical hurt. It's about the deep sense of violation that can't be validated, actually, if you don't have that vertical axis. It's interesting, just as a footnote to that, it's interesting to note I came across something recently, the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who just totally believed single axis guy, right? There's no vertical axis. He actually argues that we should not have a separate category for acts of sexual violence, that they should be just defined as violence. So there should be no category for rape, according to Michel Foucault, because rape is just physical harm, right? Because it's not, why do we call it? Why do we categorize it differently? Well, of course we do, because it's to do with the violation of something sacred. But if you don't recognize that aspect of ourselves, right, there is something sacred about, and so when we talked about in the early episodes, when we talked about that sort of double axis mode of life, which flows from who we're created to be, essentially what Christ did is that he unlocks us from that experience of desecration, that there's a sense of consecration. We're reconsecrated, and it begins a journey. So in one sense, we're reconsecrated, but there's also a journey towards becoming who we are. It's a journey of moving up that vertical axis. We are living life in accordance with our sacred selves. Now that necessarily involves sacrifice, that process. Now this is actually already acknowledged, for example, in psychologists speak about first and second order desires. So we know this in ordinary life. So a first order desire is just a appetite at the level of impulse and appetite, right? So I have this impulse to eat cake. My goodness, I have that impulse a lot, right? I also have an ambition to be, let's call it ambition for the moment, to be healthy, right? So the ambition to look good and be healthy, therefore I have to sacrifice the first order desire in order to realize the second. There's inevitable sacrifice there. Now, and this is a point that actually was Plato, actually the Greek philosopher Plato made. And I'm just going to use his framework for a second, because I think there's truth to this. He recognized this idea actually already, right? Yes, there's appetite. And then above appetite is ambition. And absolutely, you have to sacrifice sometimes your appetites for the sake of your ambitions. So, ambition to be a hero, you might sacrifice comfort, right? In order to do something heroic, right? That's part of your ambition. But he also recognized there's another element to our humanity. And again, I think he was right here. There's another element, a sort of a third and higher element. I think the way that he describes this is slightly problematic, but the general idea that there is, even above ambition, there's a higher element to our humanity. And that, in fact, the essence of our humanity is found in this higher element, that we might even sacrifice ambition to that higher element. Right.
So that higher element, that's outside of ourselves.
Well, no, the higher element is the higher sense of what we are, essentially. Look, Plato thought that this was, well, look, I mean, but he saw this in terms of like living rationally and attaining to a sort of higher image of what a human being is, so because he saw that there are certain ambitions that aren't necessarily rational. You just sort of charge into battle so that you can be a hero, but there's nothing particularly sort of rational about that. So he saw that higher element in the terms of becoming a philosopher. I mean, this is the beginnings of philosophy, right? Now, I think he's generally right in recognizing that there is a higher element. And I think human beings have always, I think it's no great achievement because I think human beings have always intuited that there is absolutely a higher element that we have somewhat lost touch with. And so human beings have tended to create other classes of people who get put in that. So priests, kings, people who are said to have divine status. I think it's the intuition that there's this sense of this higher aspect.
Yeah. What I mean to
ourselves,
being outside of ourselves, is that it's something we don't rationalize it. We don't think, like, I could understand why we want to follow our ambition. That comes from within myself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But there's something else that I intuitively know to be true, which connects into the fact that we are sacred, created by God for some other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
For something far greater than just what I think from an ambitious self.
That's right. So let's bring this back to the practical. So whatever framework use, if we're going to move up, step up into, and this is what essentially the reconciliation with God, what that enables is a kind of reinstatement. We are reinstated once and for all, but we need to, in a sense, become what we are. And so there's a journey upwards. There's a journey to learning to live in accordance with our higher self.
Yeah.
It's, for lack of a better language, in accordance with our sacred selves. So this is the, in Leviticus, 19 and 20, for example, these exhortations where God says, I have consecrated you, therefore be holy.
Yeah.
As I am holy.
Yeah.
So he's saying, I have consecrated, like I've set you apart. I've reinstated you. Now, be holy, which is, another way of saying be sacred or set apart.
Yeah.
So learn to live in accordance with your sacred selves. Now, my point is that necessarily involves sacrifice. So in the same way as I would sacrifice an appetite to an ambition, so also I would sacrifice my ambitions about what I want to be, right? And this is the essence of the false self lies in those. I think lies in those ambitions, right?
Yeah,
is to even sacrifice that for what I truly am in God. And so
you're drawing a distinction there between who you are and who you want to be.
Yeah,
are two different things. What do I want to be is different to who I actually am.
Well, hopefully those things will come into alignment. Like I mean,
there's a bridge to cross though, and that bridge is sacrifice. Because in order to become who I actually am, means giving up who I want to be.
Yeah, to me, in my experience, that actually is the biggest sacrifice. Like it's like I know that there are sacrifices where yes, there are lots of instances where I have to make choices to sacrifice certain appetites or impulses, right? I mean, that happens all the time, right? And often we think of sacrifice in that, as as that movement from I sacrifice an appetite for a higher sort of, but see, that can just be a religious ambition. So I feel good about myself,
yes,
right?
yeah.
So this is, this was the sort of great problem that Jesus recognized in the religious leaders of his time, that they were really good at sacrificing those impulses but it all, it was all about this ambition to be these godly people that everyone respected. And so, yes, there is that, right? There, of course, we have to sacrifice, there are sacrifices, the ordinary daily sacrifices that we make of our baser impulses. But that's just the start, right?
Yes.
And in some ways, there came a point in my Christian life where I realized that my preoccupation with sacrificing that stuff was just was almost like a distraction. Well, I mean, no, I needed to do that, but I got so caught up in doing that, I actually failed to realize there are bigger things here that I need to give over to God. I mean, there was a sort of a pride, a holding on to this false self, this image of myself that I was trying to build. And with those lower things, with a bit of self-discipline, you can overcome those things. And I think I got to a point because I can be fairly self-disciplined. You know, I go for regular runs and I do. So in a way, I sort of worked through those things and I felt pretty good about myself. Right?
Yeah.
I thought, well, aren't I the godly? And then actually that's when I realized what my real problems were.
That's right. Yes.
So that's, and that is, we have this amazing ability to do that. I know within myself to go about sacrifice and then become proud of the sacrifice that I've created. Yeah. And then that in itself actually makes me feel good about it. Oh, I've achieved something.
Yeah.
It's almost like as you start to walk over that bridge of sacrifice from going from who you want to be to who you actually truly are in God. It's almost like when you start to walk on that journey, you're going to trip up because you realize that even walking the journey itself is problematic because you start to become proud of the gains that you've made and it actually makes you feel better about yourself and more disciplined. And so there's actually, it even stops being sacrifice in itself and it becomes almost ambition again because I'm creating a better version of myself because I'm becoming more disciplined and more religious and spiritual and
it's not that we shouldn't do those things though.
No, but
I mean, because that was Jesus' criticism. But he was never of the religious leaders. But he's never saying don't follow the law.
Yeah. But I think what Connor's trying to say is that the sacrifice becomes the end in itself. Whereas sacrifice is actually...
It's like, what is it serving? If it's just serving the ambition.
Exactly.
It's all about moving to that higher... Yeah, that's right.
It loops back on itself.
Yes,
and it becomes an ambitious thing. And I think that maybe this gets to the heart of what we're trying to talk about here with sacrifice is that the sacrifice that I think we're being called to isn't connected to our ambition at all. It's almost like we're letting go of ambition and we're becoming... It's like I'm becoming smaller in the eyes of other people. I'm letting go of where I might want to build myself up to be more respected and have more influence. And
could we use Connell maybe the diamond metaphor here? Because essentially it's I use the illustration of us painting over the diamond to so that we
look good,
right?
Yeah.
And actually, we can get really lost under all those layers because our true glory lies in us reflecting the glory of God. So that's not an autonomous glory though, right? We there's something about, the core temptation since the fall, of course, is then you will be like God. It's the temptation to autonomy, which includes our tendency to want to build our own autonomous identity. And I think when Jesus says, in Matthew 16, just read the exact phrasing.
This is Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will find it.
What Jesus is saying is that he's saving our true selves from our false self in a sense. So the old autonomous self, that's the thing that's got to be fundamentally sacrificed. That essentially is the same sort of sacrifice that Paul is talking about when he says offer your bodies as living sacrifices. It's the willingness to it's the willingness to stop living autonomous lives and live completely for God's purpose. So it's speaking about devotedness.
Let me just point out that the passage that comes out of is when Jesus was telling Peter or the disciples that he was about to be, and Peter goes, "Oh no, Lord, that will never happen to you." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan."
Yeah,
and then he goes on to
announces that he's going to be sacrificed.
Yes, and he's sort of saying it's not about human. And he actually says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me because you are not thinking about God's concerns, but human concerns."
Yeah,
and then goes on.
The key point in all of this, and this is, I think, what we want to get to, is that the core aspect of being a Christian, being a disciple of Jesus is this process of sacrifice. And I keep coming back to that again because of the culture in which we live in, because we live in a culture of entitlement. What can I get? We live in a consumer culture, and our spirituality can easily drift into becoming this consumer spirituality. It's about me feeling good. It's about me having a good experience. It's about me feeling like I'm getting better. It's this constant sort of consumer responses because we're so conditioned, in this market economy, and everything is about consumer satisfaction and look, churches can cater for consumer satisfaction. Are we catering for all people's needs, and are we creating a good feeling? And people when they come and we even define worship, to have a good worship experience is to have a good feeling, like, oh man, I just felt so good. Now, according to Paul, let's just go back to the fundamentals of what worship actually means. Worship means offer your bodies as living sacrifices. I mean, does that always feel good? It certainly didn't feel good for Jesus. So we have to fundamentally reshape what actually all of this means. And we have regular reminders of this throughout history, regular alarm calls that our spirituality has slipped into a religious self-gratification. This is, of course, what famously Dietrich Bonhoeffer's very famous book, The Cost of Discipleship, one of the most, very influential on me in my early Christian days. I mean, I remember reading, this book, Cost of Discipleship. And, he says, for example, now that Jesus has paid for our sins and he's borne our sins, he talks about us therefore needing to bear the sins of others, not in the ultimate sense of making atonement for their sins. But like now, you live in an economy of grace.
Yes.
And it's not cheap. Bonhoeffer has a lot to say about cheap grace in the church of his time, that we've cheapened grace, right? It's just, you get this thing and it gives you access to this storehouse of blessing. He says that is just a problem, right? That's cheap grace. The grace of God opens the door for you to come and sacrifice your life for him. The way to the altar of worship is now open. You have the opportunity to come and give your life back to God.
What might be useful to do is to look at then, what are the ways that we pay the cost? Because to me, this points to something you mentioned just before there about worship in church. It often revolves around music and how it makes me feel. But if we actually really look at what is true worship, I think we kind of know this, but we fall back to this position where we think of worship as being musical, but it's not. It's actually us paying the price. That sense of offering ourselves, offering our lives, being a living sacrifice. Because of the cost that God has incurred, there's a cost now that we pay, not in order to win our salvation, but there's a response to that cost. And to me, that cost is what worship actually is. And so if we were to look at that.
And the singing part is fine. Let me just say, the singing part is great, right? Because it's all about us joining together. It's enjoying God together and praising God together. That's fine. But it only has meaning if we're doing that within the context of a life that has a sacrifice trajectory to it.
In Matthew 15, 8-9, there's a verse that says, the people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me. It's easy to read that and not think too much about it, but that's a pretty stark warning. That means that we can go through all emotions. We can say all the right things and be doing the right things, but your heart is far from me. It's in vain is how your worship, it's meaningless. And so this is where I come back to this whole idea of cost. Well, what are the costs then if we reframe worship to be a cost? What's the currency? Is it serving more at church? Is it just giving up our Sunday morning? Is it just, what's the
it may easily be that the person that vacuums the floor beforehand is actually offering something much more pleasing in that sense than the person that is all caught up in the feeling. Now, maybe, again, if we cast it this way, but the thing is kind of like, perhaps if we name what could be a problematic response to this, and this, I think, again, in my early Christian days, when I came across this stuff about sacrifice, there was a sense of alarm, right? Now I've got to
go knock on doors.
Mm-hmm. I've got to go and move to some horrible place in the world and, sort of suffer in the dust for Jesus, because it's about sacrifice, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so it can easily then become a matter of sort of racking. And this is where you almost get this monastic response. You swing the other way. You see, we've become so consumer. I'm just going to go and suffer in the dust, and maybe I'll get a sort of whip and I'll whip myself, and
which is all about making you feel better.
Again, which is it's all about making me feel better. So I think what I realized in the process, because remember, this is all relational, and in my journey forwards with God, in as I walk with Christ, every step of the way, because we're moving upwards gradually, will involve some sacrifice, but not everything all at once, right?
Yes.
It's what He's asking of me in that moment, right? What He's asking of me in that moment.
And I think rather than, I know we're going there kind of with what is the cost to us, but I think we have to start rather than starting at the bottom, we need to start at the top. And Paul says, your spiritual mode of worship is presenting yourself as a living sacrifice to God. So that means every day of my life and every step of my life, as you just said, what's God asking of me, and am I willing to pay the price of that? Now, that could be getting my family up on a Sunday morning and coming to church. Yeah, there's a cost to that. But I think we tend to use those things, and they're not invalid. I'm not saying they're invalid, but as a box check that I feel good about myself now. If we look at the musical worship aspect of things, and we talk about, did the worship make me feel good? You know what? It's not about what the music makes you feel. Your worship is a response to God. And regardless of how the music makes you feel, if you've truly worshipped God, it's going to be good.
Yeah. Look, absolutely. If God's people are gathering and giving praise to God, then who am I to be thinking, I don't like this? It's not about me.
Yeah,
it's like right. I'm going to pour myself into that because this is about God and also about what I contribute to that moment as well. But I think the small things, though, Stu, are, let's start with small things. Like, I know said,
but in the context, I think, of it being about our life, because I think the danger is in our kind of, as you were saying, in our kind of consumer comfort thing, is that we make ourselves feel good. As you said, you start to walk across this bridge and you start patting yourself on the back. It's absolutely, but it needs to be in a heart of worship, not as I'm checking a box, so I feel better about it.
Yeah, I know. I'm just conscious of the fact that probably for some people, actually getting up and getting into the car, and when God's people are gathering for this weekly public demonstration of what's most important in life, like there are simple things, simply, not being rude to your partner. Totally. Just like start there, like sacrifice. It can be the small sacrifice. But yes, I get that we can then say, well, I have a good marriage and I go to church every Sunday, and end up thinking, I've tick box. It is bigger than that.
That still feels quite transactional to me. It's not to diminish that. Those things are disciplines, daily disciplines that we go through are still important. When I was thinking about this, like practically, what does sacrifice look like? If we get right back to those fundamentals, this is how I think it translates. And it ties into what was it that God won for us? Like what started, it comes back to what I said, it's not just a transaction that happened when Jesus died on the cross. It was finished in one sense, but it was the beginning of a journey. And now it's time for us to respond to the cost that He paid. And there's a few things that I sort of noted down here. So one of the costs that we pay is our willingness to be transformed. Because that's the point. Yeah, that's exactly why He died and went through the death that He did, just to open the doorway for us to come back to who we are in Him, not necessarily who we want to be. It's the start of a journey of transformation. Our willingness to be transformed, what does that even mean? But it means to me, how willing am I to be transformed? Do I just accept what Jesus did for me on the cross? And then just
carry on,
and just carry on. Maybe doing little things to Mate, not even, I won't say little things, but doing transactional things with God in order to justify the fact, in my mind, that I'm behaving like a Christian behaves, as if I'm responding to God because, well, I did this for you, God, and I did that for you. It's like that transactional mechanism sort of bubbles away. But what I'm thinking is, but a willingness to be transformed hurts. Yeah. Because it means that I have to let go of that false self, which really hurts, because my false self, I've spent a lot of time working on it, and my false self helps me sort of win respect with people and influence. In my false self is kind of important to me in the identity that I've built up.
That's the thing is, Connell, too, because that can be quite a grand idea, but this looks like us, say, you go to work and you can be caught up in how you come across to other people, in focusing on your own success in that space, you being recognized by other people. Am I recognized by the people that, am I popular? These are ordinary things that we feel. It's the willingness to actually sacrifice that and say, I'm going to step into that space and I'm going to serve and honor and love people. Mm-hmm. So I'm sacrificing one form of life, my ambition, for that higher form of life, which is
God's purpose,
honoring people as sacred in that space. Yeah. And then also being willing to be a window to God himself in that sense, to reflect who God is in himself, which we can often sacrifice that for our ambition because we think, I want people to like me. Mm-hmm. So I just won't. Christians aren't the cool kids in town, so I'll just keep that quiet. That's an ordinary case of rocking up one day and going in with one attitude. This is about me asserting myself and being recognized and being liked, to stepping into that space with completely that Philippians 2 mindset where Paul describes Christ coming down to us and serving us and saying, let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus Christ in every circumstance.
Which is really hard because everyone around us is competing with us.
Yes.
And trying to climb over the top of us and get ahead in the career and earn more money and get more influence. You may be the only person that's all of a sudden got to go a different direction. It's like you've got to give up on that. Are you prepared to pay that cost?
Yeah.
Or is it just easier just to keep getting swept along with that? See, and there is a real cost associated with that. You'll feel it. Every day you get up, you will. Mm-hmm. You need to be in a situation where you feel these costs all the time. It's a mental dialogue almost that you're having with yourself.
And see, the thing is, Connell, what that does then is that it leads you to the next level of sacrifice, because you have to make the choice then. Because one of the reasons we do that is because we are curating our own identities and our own lives. We're playing God, right? And so ultimately what we're sacrificing is our autonomy, right? Yes. So it's like, but if I don't act like those other people and compete and step over other people, then I'm not going to climb the ladder, right? I mean, what ladder are you trying to, you have to actually sacrifice that whole area of ambition for the sake of serving God's purpose instead. God will promote you if he wants to promote you, right? He will cause you to find favor where you need to find favor, but sometimes you won't. Sometimes it'll be sacrificing that.
Yeah. So really we're relinquishing control over the value that we place on our life. Whilst we're in control, whilst we're sort of running along as fast as we can, pursuing our ambition, we place a value from our ambition that kind of gives a value to our life. Our life has value because of what we've built and built into it and are chasing and pursuing. But it's almost like we're relinquishing that value and really giving it over to God and saying, you've bought our life. I need to allow my life to be transformed so that it reflects the value that he wants our lives to represent, rather than me creating the value within my life.
Yeah.
And so that's tough. That's not something you're going to do today. It comes back again to what I said. I don't think it's a transactional There's none of this is transactional. It's relationship. It's a journey that
it's a way of living.
Yeah. And that's what salvation is presented as anyway. It's a journey of transformation. So that sacrifice that what Jesus paid on the cross was the start of us responding in that cost. So like a willingness to be transformed, relinquishing control of our life. Here's another one too, which is forgiveness. And that's a central theme of everything that Jesus talked about. And
don't mention too many, Connell. I'm starting to
get uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. Well, it's uncomfortable for me when I think about it, because when I was thinking about the cost that Jesus actually paid for us on the cross and the sense of justice being done, I kind of realized there's a sense of, at one level, it's justice being done because we've sinned against God. So there's justice being done there. But in another sense, the extremity of the justice, that what you'd basically taken the most sacred being becoming the most desecrated.
Yeah. It's the ultimate, in a sense, it's the ultimate injustice.
Yeah.
Is done to fulfill justice, for us.
It's almost like it's all encompassing. So then the justice that was actually won by Jesus on the cross creates this space where even the injustices that have been committed against me personally by other people, what Jesus did on the cross actually nullifies that. It's done. So what he's actually done is created this sense of the grace zone. So if you're going to come over this side and step into what Jesus has paid for you, that sense of justice is being done, is that if you want to step into that and get the benefit of that, you're stepping into this grace zone. So all those injustices that have been incurred against you personally has been dealt with.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Yeah.
It's the two go completely together. That's right.
And am I willing to pay the cost of accepting that justice has been done for things that people who have hurt me or acted against me? I mean, take an extreme example of this. Imagine someone had come and murdered one of my children. Is there a sense of justice that the price that Jesus paid on the cross means that I have to forgive someone who's committed something that's just so bad? I use this as an example. Something cropped up on my YouTube feed, and it was actually having
the source of all truth.
It's always dangerous.
It's great. And it was actually having a go, taking a shot at Christianity, just showing how ridiculous it is. The fact that God forgives people, which means that, who knows, maybe someone like Hitler was saved.
Yeah, I remember actually talking to someone about this. Said the one thing I can't accept about Christianity is that really bad people could be forgiven.
Mm-hmm. So, and someone had put this sort of skit together to illustrate the point. Again, having a go at us, and basically this Jewish person was standing there talking to Jesus, trying to convince Jesus why I should be allowed to come into heaven. And he's having the conversation with him, and he goes, "Oh, who's that guy back there?" And he's in heaven behind Jesus. And Jesus goes, "Oh, that's Hitler." And then this Jewish person sort of looks at him and goes, "Well, I don't know that I want to be here." Whilst it was sort of taking a shot at Christianity, it made me stop and think.
Nothing is beyond the reach of Christ's forgiveness. Yeah,
and that means I have to be prepared, irrespective.
And we're not saying everyone in the end goes to heaven.
No, we're not saying that.
Yeah,
no.
And
we're making the assumption in this case.
Very much doubts about whether Hitler.
Not even speculating, but I'm just using it as an example. That actually made me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I get that.
There's an extravagance, isn't there, about the grace of God? It's beyond reason, in a sense, isn't it?
And how willing am I then to potentially enter into heaven with people who have committed an atrocity against me personally?
It is personal. This is not ruling out justice in society. This is about how we respond individually.
It doesn't mean that justice won't be done, but it means how am I going to respond to that? See, to me, what Jesus did in terms of the justice that was achieved was basically saying we don't have the right now to seek
vengeance or restitution.
Yeah, it's like the vengeance ultimately rests with God, who's the ultimate one who's been wronged and offended by.
Well, this is the parable of the famous parable of the unmerciful servant. A king forgives his servant for zillions and zillions, and then that servant goes to another servant that owes him, loose change, and has him cast into jail and punished for. And I mean, the point is that once the king does that, it fundamentally changes what is right for the rest of us.
Yeah. But from that servant's point of view, someone owed him money, so that was a very personal debt.
Yeah.
And he wasn't prepared to let go of it, because you personalize the sense of someone owing you something. But what Jesus actually did is that if you're going to come over to step into the space that I've won and paid for you, all of those things are dealt with. That's hugely consequential in terms of feeling there's a cost that I've incur in that, because I have to choose to forgive.
Yeah.
It's easy to depersonalize it and talk about the sacrifice, what Jesus did, restored the relationship with God. It actually created a whole new order.
Yeah, that's right.
That we step into. And there's a cost associated with that.
Yeah, the topic of forgiveness is a massive topic, and we probably just want to stress too, forgiveness, and this is a point that the theologian Miroslav Volf makes, because his family suffered terrible atrocities in the Second World War. And, he talks about forgiveness as a process, but it's, again, the point is it's a trajectory in a certain direction, and it's costly. We can think of big grand circumstances, but it's actually the choice that we make in the everyday circumstances. This person strikes me. Am I going to strike back? Or am I going to absorb the offense and return kindness? I mean, this is the stuff that happens. And that doesn't mean not communicate and not, but these are the decisions that we make in everyday life. For me, a very big thing for me is the practice of tithing. For me is a fortnight. I now do it weekly, because I recognize the importance of the gesture, actually, because to me it represents letting go of something that makes me feel in control of my life. So the giving back to God of that, 10% of my income is this relinquishment of something really important that gives me a sense of security. And that for me is such an important regular sacrifice that helps me on that trajectory. And I think it's the small things, to some people feel like a big thing, but really comparatively, it's one of a number of small things that we do to, a sense, set ourselves on that trajectory. So lest we, think in response to this episode, it's these.
No, that's right.
Yes,
totally.
there is one big sacrifice. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices.
Yeah.
But we do that through small steps. Remember, this is a step-by-step relational journey. And guaranteed, for each three of us, for the rest of this day, there will be small sacrifices that we will have the opportunity to make. And it's getting into the habit of thinking, not what am I entitled to? What can I get? What can I build about, how can I get? It's flipping that and asking the question, what can I give here? What does God require of me here? What can I sacrifice?
Another way that we pay cost is actually valuing the sacred over pleasure. To me, that's a big one as well. Am I prepared to forfeit pleasure to pursue the sacred? It comes back to what you're saying about the order of priorities and so on. But that to me can be an ongoing daily decision that you've got to make. For what does that even mean? I'm not sure, but it means that's got to be my highest order, is pursuing the sacred, not pleasure. And the converse of that is embracing pain to avoid desecration. So I'm really looking at two sides of the positive and the negative. We're talking about the axis, the vertical and the horizontal. The horizontal is pain and pleasure. The vertical is sacred and desecration. If we take the positive side of it, you've got sacred and pleasure. And on the negative side of the two axis, you've got pain and desecration. So I need to choose sacred over pleasure. Not there's anything wrong with pleasure, but in terms of priorities, pursue the sacred, not pleasure. In terms of the negative side of the axis, embrace pain to avoid desecration's worse than pain. So choose pain to avoid desecration.
That's right.
And if we shift the priorities in our life.
So the sacred is greater than pleasure, and desecration is greater than pain.
That shifts priorities in your life.
Absolutely.
And that comes, I mean, to me, that's sacrifice.
Yeah.
They're sacrificial choices I need to make.
Yeah. Matt, just before you wrap up, I just want to come back to the Romans 12 thing, because I think it speaks to, your comment about the whole idea of the journey of faith is about being transformed and our lives being transformed. And we quoted the first part of Romans 12, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. So in our everyday decisions, those little things, it's changing our mind, the way we think about what the priority should be, as we talked about the hierarchy of priorities there, and asking through relationship with God, I know what I want to do here, but what is it that you want me to do here?
I mean, the interesting thing with those verses is that it's the practice that enables the mind change as well. It's offer your bodies as living sacrifice. It's like, do something here. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Big part of the renewing of the mind is actually practicing the things that you think. It's not enough for us to sit here and know what's right and know what's higher and what's lower. To know that, yes, we need to avoid desecration and pursue what is sacred. But it's actually to really know that and to know the value of those things is only through the small acts of sacrifice. It's each step is sacrificing the lower for the sake of the higher.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Thrive Perspectives. Our hope is that these discussions will challenge you to look at life from a new perspective. You'll find all our resources at the Thrive Today website, thrivetoday.tv. If there's a topic that you'd like us to discuss, please email us. Our email is contact@thrivetoday.tv. Until next time, our prayer is that you will thrive.